Lesson 21, Topics for Discussion.
One, family life. Family life derives from the basic functions of the family, which vary somewhat from society to society, but which have many universal elements too. The family is the socially approved setting in which a married couple raises children. The family thus has obligations to society, which it meets when it gives children a home and trains them for adulthood. Society, in turn, gives recognition to the children, assuring them of an eventual place. The family must also provide for the physical and affectional needs of its members. Family life prospers when the members interact with each other in work or play. To the extent that other social groups take over family responsibilities, this family life is weakened and must be redirected. If we do not wish to abandon the family altogether, we must each give more thought to the type of family life that we desire and how to realize it. What ideals do you believe in regard to family life? What do you think the future holds for family life?
Discuss these two questions. Before doing so, listen to the simulated radio panel discussion that is recorded on tape, or which your teacher will read to you if you do not have a tape recorder. The participants discuss these same two questions, and you may get additional ideas to contribute to the classroom discussion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to Talk It Over, the weekly radio panel discussion program. I am your moderator and host, Ken Cunningham. We'll be discussing family life with our three panelists of the evening. Let me introduce first Dr. Harriet Filer from the Department of Social Psychology at Lockwood University. With us also is Mr. Arthur Solano from the New York Department of Social Services, and Dr. Samuel Greenberg, who has worked with UNESCO for 12 years and is now directing their field survey on family life in developing countries. I would like us to start off this evening by having Mr. Solano tell us what he understands by the term family life and describe his idea of the ideal family life.
Thank you. I imagine that the term means different things to different people, but I always say that family life is the part of our life that we spend with the members of our family. It includes a wide variety of activities: eating, sleeping, teaching the child, to mention only a few. The ideal family life, it seems to me, is one that produces harmony and happiness for the members of the family. There must be a balance between family life and social life, not so much of the former that the family becomes ingrown, and not so much of the latter that they never are alone as a family.
And career mustn't be overdone either. Some men are so wrapped up in their work that home is just a rest and refueling stop for them. And nowadays, many women have outside jobs, and so there's no one devoted full time to the home and family anymore.
It sounds like family life is on a decline. How far do you think the trend will go?
Well, it's true that society is taking over many duties which at some former times the family had to perform, such as education and care for the elderly. These things are now done more professionally outside the home. But there's something else that only the home can provide, and that's a psychological and emotional refuge. That's one thing that's missing in an orphanage or a nursing home, even though all the teaching and medical services may be the best in the world from a professional standpoint. When a child gets into difficulties with his playmates, he runs home. When someone is sick, he recovers faster at home once he has received all the necessary medical help. So to answer your question, I think that though the number of family responsibilities is decreasing, the ones that are left are becoming more important, and we will consequently always need the family.
And if I might get in this, not only do the individuals benefit, but society benefits from strong families too.
But I don't think we've quite answered the question about the decline of family life. The fact is that outside forces are weakening the family to a dangerous point, so that it becomes a question whether the family has enough strength to perform the duties remaining to it. With the present emphasis on individual development, family members have fewer points of common interest. Everyone is expected to be a different individual, to think for himself. We know the family is in trouble by the fact that many serious people are questioning its necessity and are trying other forms.
I guess you are referring to communal-type arrangements, Professor. However, I still believe that the nuclear family has more strength and will outlast the other forms. For biological reasons, the nuclear family is the most natural form, and our emotional satisfaction seems to require the stable one-to-one relationship found in the nuclear family. I feel that the end result of the crisis will be to improve the family and correct its failures.
Yet it's hard to see how that will come about. All the signs so far, divorce, juvenile psychological problems, and so forth, indicate that we're in for a rough time.
I'm afraid that's true, though it also depends on how you interpret the figures. Some would say that some of the increased divorces are simply the result of easier divorce laws and do not necessarily show that there are more unhappy marriages. However, the most encouraging sign to me is that today's students feel there should be more emphasis on family life in our educational system. They want the family to be a strong institution, and that can only be a good sign.
Before we bring tonight's program to a close, I would like Dr. Greenberg to tell us something about family life in other countries. Is it possible to compare industrialized societies with non-industrialized ones?
Well, it is possible to say a few things.
Excuse me, Professor. Before you get started, let me say that we have only a few minutes left, so you will need to be brief.
Very well. Industrialization does encourage movement of workers into the industrialized areas. And this means separating part of the extended families that exist in many pre-industrial societies. The family head still has control. He can even call a member of the family back from the factory. But it's the beginning of a trend. As specialization in all aspects of society increases, individuals are drawn away. People do want to continue their family obligations, but this becomes increasingly difficult and also less and less necessary. Now, the thing about industrialized societies is that the family is not and cannot be a producing unit, and it cannot even prepare the child for his or her career. And in addition...
I'm sorry, but our time is up. Let me thank you all for sharing your experience with us. This is Ken Cunningham. Please join us again next week when we will again talk it over.
New vocabulary in Topic 1, Text and Tape. Listen.
Nouns: career, decline, extent, harmony, institution, orphanage, recognition, relationship, refuge, setting.
Verbs: assure, benefit, devote, interact, redirect, train, vary, weaken.
Adjectives: emotional, eventual, formerly, ideal, ingrown, juvenile, latter, wrapped up.
Adverbs: nowadays, increasingly, socially.
Compounds: nursing home, refueling stop.
Expressions: in regard to, on a decline, one-to-one, the end result.
Organizations: Department of Social Psychology, New York Department of Social Services, UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
2. Clothing, use or fashion. Through the ages, man has covered his body with one thing or another, and for most of those ages, kings, queens, and upper classes thought that fashion was their sole right. Laws regulated clothing according to a person's status. At one time in the Western world, the common man had only one or two garments which he wore his entire life. In early Rome, a close look at what people wore on their feet would have told us to which class the people belonged. With the French Revolution came a more democratic society and a common man who had power. From then on, fashion could belong to everyone. Many factors influence fashion today. One thing remains unchanged. Clothing and the making of it occupy a significant place in the lives of people everywhere. Billions of dollars are made and spent, and many people are employed in the clothing industry today. Sometimes purely practical articles of clothing used by one section of society are publicized by the clothing industry as new items for general use. They occasionally survive the test of time to become practical and fashionable for a much larger part of the population. The sweater, which began as a fisherman's garment, is a good example of this. Once it was not difficult to see where utility and fashion in clothing went their separate ways. But nowadays, is it still possible to separate these two aspects of clothing?
Some questions for discussion.
1. What has man used to cover his body down through the ages?
2. What are some of the factors that influence fashion?
3. What practical considerations influence clothing?
4. In your country, is utility or fashion of first importance in clothing? How about the rest of the world? How about primitive people? 5. What are some well-known fibers that have long been used for clothing?
6. Is the clothing in your country functional? Explain.
The accompanying tape recording contains a discussion touching on most of the questions noted above. Listen to the tape or to your teacher reading the tape script to get ideas or additional ideas you can use in the discussion.
Good evening, everyone. This is Miles Long again, moderator of Timely Topics. Today we are going to talk about fashion and utility in clothing. My guests are two people from the clothing industry, Miss Kenna Stott, a fashion designer, and Mr. Marty Rye, head of one of America's finest fashion houses. Miss Stott, if I asked you simply to talk about clothing, how would you begin?
Well, Miles, first off, we can't say simply anything when we talk about clothing. It's such a big topic with such a long history. It has so many, many aspects. Designing, modeling, selling, photography, and heaven knows what else. Right, Marty?
Right, Kenna. But I suppose if Miles were to ask me to begin, I'd talk a little bit about history. Men painted their bodies and hung things around their necks thousands of years ago, and in prehistory, an animal fur was thrown over a man's shoulder to protect him from the cold. That was a pretty practical thing to do, I guess.
Right, but body painting sounds a little like modern lipstick and powder and rouge to me.
Yes, you are right, Miles. Now, after the furs came the early fabrics. Linen and cotton, wool and silk are all very old, you know. Thousands of years old, in fact.
Fashion, too, has a long history, of course. The most important thing that affects fashion, we must remember, is whether men and women will wear what is presented to them. That's about the most important factor of all.
I guess that fashion is also affected by the amount of leisure time people have, or whether they spend all of their time at work.
You're so right. And transportation affects it, too. How easy it is for new fashions to get into small towns and rural areas.
Let's not forget money. Money, fortunately or unfortunately, is important in the fashion picture.
I suppose it's impossible to separate fashion and utility.
Not entirely. If you live in a hot climate, you simply aren't going to wear heavy, warm clothing. And if your job demands that you teach school or do business with other men and women, you won't wear the kind of clothes you do when you work on a farm or make pottery all day to earn your living.
Men were always the colorful, fashionable ones for a good many years. Then came those quiet business suits. But now things are opening up for us. Texture and design in cloth, fancy buttons.
I really am glad to see more color, more than just in ties and socks.
Let's get back to talking about utility a little. The new fibers which are man-made, the synthetic fibers, have made new definitions of what is useful, I think. For example, man-made fibers can be made so that they are soil-resistant and wrinkle-resistant. They can be tailored to stretch with the human body and to be non-absorbent so that they will wash and dry quickly.
Did you know that the first man-made fibers are probably the result of someone watching a silkworm work? Spinning a fiber and having the air dried, which is what the silkworm does, is just about the way we make man-made fibers.
That's pretty simple, isn't it?
The idea is simple, Miles. The chemistry is complicated.
But isn't it true that most people in the world wear cotton? And silk is still a luxury fiber, isn't it?
Of course, but man-made fibers do help stretch the shrinking supply of natural fibers, and they can do things that natural fibers can't.
What was the first man-made fiber, anyway?
The first man-made fiber was rayon, made from cellulose. The first fiber from chemicals was nylon. That was made as long ago as 1939.
Many others followed pretty fast then. Acrylic, glass fiber, polyester, and many, many more.
As a man, I can say I'm glad men's clothes have become lighter in weight. They're so much more comfortable.
Yes, they are. And the big new thing for men is sportswear. Before sportswear came in and became popular, sports were played in whatever clothing a man had. Now in the United States, at least half all men's clothing produced is sportswear. The trend in men's clothes is toward simplicity.
I think functional is a good word to use for clothes today. Men's sportswear and women's slacks are meant to be worn when they are the best kind of garment to wear at a particular moment. That's a big 20th century change.
Well, both of you, thanks for sharing your knowledge about clothing with us. We'll close the program today with a final question. What's a one-word keynote to modern fashion?
Change.
I must say, you didn't have to think very long to get that word, did you? Thank you again.
New vocabulary in Topic 2, Text and Tape. Listen. Nouns.
Acrylic, apparel, garment, modeling, polyester, pottery, powder, queen, rouge, utility.
Verbs.
Publicize, stretch, survive.
Adverb.
Occasionally.
Adjectives.
Democratic, entire, fancy, unchanged.
Compounds.
Body painting, fisherman, keynote, lipstick.
Expressions.
Common man, heaven knows, test of time, upper class.
End of Lesson 21.